Arthur Penhaligon knelt before a colossal saguaro, its fluted arms angled toward the boundless Arizona sky. With a slim, specialized trowel, he coaxed the earth around its base, administering a precise dose of slow-release nutrients. Already at 8, the air wavered with the desert's nascent heat, carrying the sharp tang of creosote bush and the sweet perfume of blooming prickly pear. A wordless melody escaped his lips, a tune Eleanor favored while capturing the arid landscape in her sketchbook. His desert garden offered solace. Each carefully selected succulent, each deliberately positioned stone, served as a testament to his unwavering dedication, a living memorial etched in green to Eleanor's artistic soul. Where others perceived only aridity, she had discovered an untamed elegance, and he learned to appreciate it through her discerning gaze. Now, nurturing the very plants she'd cherished, he found himself closest to her spirit. He gently whisked away a fallen leaf from a barrel cactus, its spines resembling miniature golden daggers. "Remember her, old friend?" he murmured, his voice grating slightly from lack of use. "She admired your resilience." The cactus, silent as stone, offered no retort. Yet Arthur discovered a certain consolation in its steadfast presence. His attention drifted to a vibrant cluster of penstemons, their trumpet-shaped blossoms proving irresistible to hovering hummingbirds. He nipped off the faded blooms, each movement precise and efficient. Eleanor would often remark that he possessed the dexterity of a surgeon. He had brushed it off with a self-deprecating chuckle, but secretly, he reveled in the compliment. He gleaned a deep satisfaction from the meticulous attention he lavished upon his plants. It was a strategy for mastering the chaos, for imposing order upon a world that frequently felt capriciously random. A sudden sunburst reflected off glass momentarily dazzled him. Shielding his vision, he glanced toward the street. The morning glare bounced off the pristine windows of his identical beige stucco home, a carbon copy of the 27 others lining his cul-de-sac. This was Harmony Glades, a meticulously planned community where serenity and sameness reigned supreme. From above, the neighborhood would appear as an unblemished grid, each house adorned with its uniformly verdant lawn, impeccably sculpted shrubbery, and HOA-approved mailbox. Suburban utopia, the brochures had proclaimed. Arthur had always felt like an outsider. He endured the HOA's edicts, offering polite nods to Carol, the officious president, and maintaining a passable shade of green for his lawn, despite his secret longing for a water-wise xeriscape. He had mastered the unspoken rules of Harmony Glades, but his heart remained detached. His passion lay in botany, not barbecues. His companions were cacti, not golf buddies. But Eleanor had loved it here. She embraced the quiet streets, the tight-knit community, the comforting embrace of security, and so for her he had grudgingly accepted Harmony Glades. After her passing, the temptation to relocate tugged at him relentlessly. However, the mere thought of abandoning the house they had transformed into a home, the garden they had nurtured together, was simply too much to bear. He remained, anchored to the familiar as a lifeline. Having finished ministering to the penstemons, he straightened up, his back registering a dull, nagging ache. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and surveyed his verdant domain. The sun continued its ascent, painting long, dramatic shadows across the desert floor. A dip was in order. He ambled toward the rear of his residence, passing a row of neatly manicured oleanders, their rosy blossoms a vibrant counterpoint to the beige stucco. He unlocked the gate to his backyard, stepping into a contrasting world. Here, the desert aesthetic prevailed, yet with a more relaxed, easygoing air. A flagstone patio enveloped a shimmering turquoise pool, its surface unmarred save for the occasional shiver caused by a gentle breeze. A collection of inviting lounge chairs and potted succulents completed the tableau. This was Arthur's personal sanctuary, his refuge from the relentless conformity of Harmony Glades. He discarded his gardening attire and donned his swimming trunks. The water beckoned. Cool and irresistible, he lowered himself in, a drawn-out sigh of contentment escaping his lips as the soothing liquid enveloped him. He swam a few measured laps, relishing the sensation of weightlessness. As he floated supine, his gaze fixed on the unbroken expanse of sky. A profound sense of tranquility descended. The sun's gentle caress, the water's rhythmic whispers, the subtle hum of the desert, all combined to create a deeply soothing, restorative experience. Here, in his backyard haven, he could almost momentarily banish the sharp sting of loss, the gnawing emptiness that clung to him. Here, he could almost convince himself that Eleanor remained, sharing this precious moment of peace. He closed his eyes and drifted, allowing the water to support him. He conjured an image of Eleanor beside him, her contagious laughter echoing in the air, her hand reaching out to clasp his. He knew it was nothing more than a phantom, a fleeting illusion, but he desperately clung to it nonetheless. That it was all that remained. The jarring drone of a lawnmower shattered the stillness. Arthur frowned, snapping his eyes open. It was Bob Henderson, his ever-vigilant neighbor, obsessively mowing his already immaculate lawn. Arthur watched for a fleeting moment, irritation flickering across his features. Bob was the very embodiment of Harmony Glades conformity, always eager to toe the line, ever ready to report any infraction to the HOA's watchful eye. Arthur averted his gaze, attempting to drown out the obtrusive noise. He squeezed his eyes shut once more, concentrating on the feel of the water against his skin, the sun's warmth gracing his face. But the lawnmower's relentless din persisted, a constant, unwelcome reminder of the world beyond his oasis. He hauled himself from the pool and wrapped himself in a thick towel. The fragile peace had been irrevocably broken. The tranquility had vanished. He knew he couldn't remain forever cocooned in his memories. He had to confront the world, to grapple with the stark reality of his grief. But not today. Today he would retreat into his garden, seek solace in his sanctuary, and attempt to find refuge in the desert's enduring beauty. He trudged back toward his house, his steps heavy. As he reached the gate, he paused, casting one last glance at his pool. The turquoise water shimmered invitingly beneath the sun. Attempting Siren's call, he hesitated for a heartbeat, then shook his head resolutely. He couldn't escape. Indefinitely, he unlatched the gate and re-entered the manufactured world of Harmony Glades. The grating sound of Bob Henderson's lawnmower intensified, an incessant reminder of the rules, the regulations, the suffocating expectations. Arthur sighed heavily and shuffled toward his house, his shoulders slumped in resignation, that he knew that sooner or later he would be forced to confront the HOA, to challenge their suffocating control, to fight for his right to live authentically. But not yet did he lack the strength. Not yet. He slipped into his house, closing the door with a soft click. The enveloping silence offered a modicum of respite. He made his way to his living room and sank into his favorite armchair, the one Eleanor had always claimed as her own. He picked up a tome on desert flora, attempting to focus on the densely packed text, but his thoughts continued to drift back to the shimmering pool, the sensation of cool water, the sun's radiant embrace. Abandoning the book, he stared out the window at his desert garden. The cacti and succulents stood sentinel, their stoic presence a wellspring of comfort. He pondered what Eleanor would have made of all this. His inconsolable grief, his crushing loneliness, his perpetual struggle to adapt. He already knew her answer. She would have implored him to remain strong, to cultivate resilience, to never surrender. And she would have insisted that he fight for the principles he held dear. Arthur shut his eyes and inhaled deeply. That he knew she was right. He could no longer allow the HOA to dictate the course of his life. That he couldn't permit them to strip away his sanctuary. He had to push back. The dormant seed of rebellion, long buried beneath layers of grief and resignation, began to stir within him. It was a minute seed, almost imperceptible, yet its presence was undeniable, and it was beginning to sprout. The toll of conformity, he realized, was simply too steep. He was ready to pay a different price, one of his own, making T open his eyes, his gaze hardening with resolve. The grief remained, The loneliness still lingered, but they were now accompanied by something else, a nascent emotion, a spark of determination, a glimmer of defiance. Arthur Penhaligon was about to declare war on Harmony Glades, and this time, he intended to emerge victorious, the long arm of the HOA. The Harmony Glades community center reeked of lemon cleaner and dashed hopes. Arthur hadn't crossed its threshold since Eleanor's service, and the aggressively cheerful decor, a riot of pastel hues and saccharine slogans, felt especially oppressive tonight. The monthly HOA meeting was imminent, but he chose a seat at the rear, as distant from the dais as possible. His hands locked together in his lap. A palpable disapproval emanated from the rows of meticulously styled heads. He was, after all, a marked man, the widower with the defiant desert garden, the rebel who favored sprawling succulents over the glade's rigid landscaping conformity. Carol Vandergelt, the HOA president and self-appointed guardian of Harmony Glades, glided onto the stage. Her power suit, the shade of an overripe pomelo, seemed to suck the light from the room. Her practiced smile, a mere grimace, failed to reach her eyes. "Good evening," she proclaimed, her amplified voice resonating unpleasantly. "We'll commence with a review of May's water conservation figures. As you all appreciate, responsible water stewardship is integral to preserving our community's polished facade and, crucially, bolstering our property values." A graph splashed onto the screen, a stark depiction of collective water expenditure. 0.1 sliver, highlighted in an ominous crimson, designated the unexplained discrepancy. As is evident, Carol's tone dripped with censure. This unexplained discrepancy has, regrettably, widened. Such a deficit is intolerable. We must all contribute. Remember, beige is the new black. A smattering of dutiful applause rippled through the assembly. Arthur snorted softly. Eleanor would have abhorred this pretense, this obsession. She saw water as a vital necessity, not a resource to be metered and manipulated. Next came the violation report, a source of dread. Mildred Abernathy, Carol's loyal lieutenant and the Glade's reigning busybody, adjusted her spectacles and began to recite from a well-worn binder. Mr. Henderson, 42, Bluebonnet Lane, improper disposal of grass. Trimmings, warning issued. Mrs. Davies, 17, Snapdragon Court, unauthorized bird feeder. Remedial action required. The roster droned on, an inventory of trivial complaints and precisely cataloged offenses. Arthur envisioned Mildred, a furtive shadow in the shrubbery, meticulously chronicling her neighbor's misdeeds. Then, Mildred's intonation sharpened. Mr. Penhaligon, 21 Cactus Bloom Drive, excessive water consumption and non-conforming landscaping. Formal violation notice and mandatory levy to be imposed. A wave of fury, scalding and acrid, surged through Arthur. He shot to his feet, the chair screeching against the tiled floor. Excessive water consumption? He challenged, his voice amplified by the sudden quiet. "I cultivate a desert garden, Mildred, that it's designed for aridity." Carol pierced him with a glacial glare. "Mr. Penhaligon, we've logged numerous complaints regarding the unorthodox appearance of your property. Harmony Glades upholds a specific image. Your desertscape falls outside those established boundaries." "Image?" Arthur sputtered, his voice gaining intensity. "My garden flourishes, it's vibrant, and it's the only damn thing that anchors me to Eleanor." A collective intake of breath swept the room. Carol's painted smile wavered momentarily before reforming. "Mr. Penhaligon," she said, her voice laced with steel, "while personal bereavement merits our compassion, it does not exempt you from adhering to community standards. Loss is universal. Adherence to order is our shared responsibility." "Order?" Arthur emitted a hollow, bitter sound that passed as laughter. "This isn't order. It's enforced monotony. You're draining the life from this place. Lawn by meticulously curated lawn." His gaze traveled over the crowd. A vista of bland sameness. He detected fear lurking in their eyes, a terror of deviation, of dissent, of disrupting the established norm. He saw Mildred smirking, Carol's expression a mask of controlled rage, and George Harding subtly nodding from across the aisle in what Arthur hoped was solidarity. "I won't pay your fine," Arthur declared, his voice quivering with rage. "And I will not alter my garden." He pivoted and strode out, leaving a palpable silence behind. Emerging into the cool desert air, he experienced an odd sense of liberation. He had, at last, drawn a line in the sand. Later that night, Mildred, in her flawlessly organized study, a glass of warmed milk and a towering stack of HOA papers at her side, revisited Arthur Penhaligon's file. A faint smile playing on her lips, he had committed a fatal error, challenging Carol in open forum. The HOA would now make an example of him. She picked up a pen and began drafting a missive detailing the subsequent steps in the disciplinary process, mounting surcharges, potential litigation, and, ultimately, the eradication of the offending landscaping. She paused, relishing her influence, her capacity to dictate the lives of those around her. Meanwhile, at 32, Mockingbird Lane, Carol Vandergelt traversed her flawlessly appointed living room, her cell phone pressed against her ear. "Yes, Mother, understand," she said, her voice taut with exasperation. "But I assure you, the situation is managed. This Penhaligon matter is a minor disruption." Her mother's voice, cutting and critical, echoed through the receiver. "Carol, you understand the importance of appearances. The community must maintain its exclusivity. Should property values decline, our investment is at risk." Carol sighed. Her mother's fortune constituted the bedrock of her social stature, the source of her dominance in Harmony Glades. She could not permit anything to jeopardize that. "I understand, Mother," she repeated, her voice subdued. "I will manage it, I promise." After terminating the call, Carol studied her reflection in the sleek surface of her mahogany dining table. She perceived the meticulously fabricated image she had cultivated, the impeccably styled coiffure, the haute couture attire, the facade of effortless elegance. Beneath it all, she glimpsed the dread, the fear of losing command, of being exposed, of failing to measure up to her mother's impossible standards. She lifted a framed portrait of herself and her mother, captured years prior at a benefit gala. Her mother's visage was severe, judgmental. Carol forced a smile, though her eyes remained icy and calculating. She would not permit Arthur Penhaligon, or anyone else, to destabilize her painstakingly constructed existence. She would break him. Back at 21 Cactus Balloon Drive, Arthur stood among his plants, the moonlight painting elongated, spectral shadows across the cacti and succulents. He felt a measure of serenity amidst the chaos that he had committed to his course he would fight for. Eleanor's legacy, for his personal autonomy, for the freedom to live genuinely, even if it meant confronting the full might of the Harmony Glades HOA, that he ran his hand along the gnarled trunk of an ancient Joshua tree, sensing its strength, its capacity to flourish in the most unforgiving environments. He knew he would need that self-same strength in the days ahead, that a notice and a nudge. A cream-colored rectangle peeked from under the doormat, practically vibrating with passive aggression. Arthur picked it up, the glossy paper cool against his skin. Harmony Glades Homeowners Association. It declared in a font that tried too hard to be friendly, an official notice, that he sighed. The sound rustling the brittle leaves of the desert willow he'd planted just outside the door. He hadn't even finished his morning coffee. The notice, addressed to resident, not even by name, detailed a supposed spike in water usage at his property. Specifically, it mentioned the pool. While the HOA encourages responsible water conservation efforts, recent monitoring indicates excessive water consumption that may be attributable to pool maintenance and upkeep. Please review your usage and ensure compliance with community guidelines, which limit pool refills to no more the redacted percentage per month. Redacted percentage? Really? Arthur felt a flicker of annoyance. He'd been meticulous about his water usage, acutely aware of the desert landscape and the HOA's hawkish eyes. He'd even invested in a pool cover to minimize evaporation. He tossed the notice onto the kitchen counter, where it landed next to Eleanor's favorite ceramic mug, still stained with the memory of her Earl Grey tea. The sight was a familiar pang, A sharp reminder of the silence that now permeated the house, he grabbed his reading glasses from the counter and retrieved his latest water bill from the filing cabinet. Numbers swam before his eyes. He meticulously compared the current bill to the previous month's, cross-referencing it with the HOA's vaguely worded guidelines, which he'd printed out and highlighted months ago, just in case. According to his calculations, he was well within the acceptable range that in fact, his usage was slightly lower than the same period last year. The pool had required a minor top-off after a particularly windy week, but nothing that would qualify as excessive. He muttered, "Excessive, my foot." This wasn't about water conservation. It was about controlled. It was Carol Vandergelt, flexing her HOA presidency like a newly acquired muscle that he reread the notice, searching for any loophole, any ambiguity he could exploit. The vagueness was infuriatingly deliberate. He slammed the bill onto the counter, the sound echoing in the quiet kitchen that he needed a second opinion. Someone who understood the intricacies of Harmony Glade's gossip and Carol's particular brand of petty tyranny. Bev Olson that he found. Bev tending her roses in the front yard, a pair of bright pink gardening gloves protecting her hands. "Bev, got a minute?" Arthur asked, his voice a little sharper than he intended. Bev straightened up, her eyes twinkling behind her oversized sunglasses. "Arthur, of course, dear, what's got your cacti in a twist?" He held out the notice. "This. The HOA claims I'm using too much water for my pool." Bev snatched the notice, her expression shifting from friendly curiosity to conspiratorial glee. "Let's see what Carol's up to now." She scanned the document, her lips moving silently as she read. Excessive water consumption. Vague, isn't it? Deliberately so, Arthur confirmed. "I've checked my bill that I'm within the guidelines." Bev chuckled, a low, throaty sound. "Oh, Arthur, you sweet, naive man. This isn't about water, it's about you." Arthur frowned. "What do you mean?" "Carol Vandergelt doesn't like being challenged," Bev explained, snipping a dead rose with a vengeance. "Your unorthodox landscaping has ruffled her perfectly manicured feathers. She sees you as a threat to the community aesthetic, whatever that means. So, this is just harassment." "Indirectly," Bev said, her eyes scanning the street. "It's a warning shot across the bow. She wants you to conform, to fall in line, and she's using her position to make your life difficult." "But I'm not doing anything wrong," Arthur protested, his frustration rising. "Honey, that's not the point," Bev said, patting his arm. "In Harmony Glades, perception is everything, and Carol Vandergelt perceives you as a rebel." Bev lowered her voice, leaning closer. "I heard Mildred Abernathy, Carol's mother, practically foaming at the mouth at the last HOA meeting. Something about property values and setting an example. You know how she gets." Arthur did know. Mildred was the puppet master behind Carol, a woman whose social standing was directly proportional to the uniformity of Harmony Glades. Apparently, Bev continued, "Someone, and I have my suspicions, called in a complaint about your pool. Said they saw you filling it up for hours. Probably Mildred herself, lurking behind her drapes with binoculars." Arthur felt a surge of anger. "That's ridiculous. I topped it off for maybe 15 minutes. "I know, dear, I know," Bev soothed. "But that's the game they play. Little lies, subtle accusations, designed to wear you down." "And what am I supposed to do?" Arthur asked, his voice laced with exasperation. Bev shrugged, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "You could cave, rip out your desert garden, replace it with thirsty Kentucky bluegrass, and become a model Harmony Glade citizen." Arthur scoffed. "Not a chance." "Didn't think so," Bev said, grinning. "Then you fight back, but you have to be smart about it. Carol's got the power, but you've got creativity." She paused, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "I've heard whispers about a loophole in the HOA bylaws regarding rainwater harvesting. Something about beneficial reuse. Maybe you could look into that. Claim you're collecting rainwater to replenish your pool, that it's environmentally friendly and technically legal." Arthur's eyes widened. "That's brilliant. Just planting the seed, dear," Bev said, winking. "And remember, knowledge is power. Find out everything you can about the HOA rules, their finances, their little secrets. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to defend yourself." She straightened up, brushing dirt off her gardening gloves. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have roses to prune and gossip to spread. Just let me know if you need any assistance." Arthur thanked Bev, a sense of purpose beginning to replace his frustration. He still felt a pang of loneliness, a hollow ache where Eleanor used to be. But this wasn't just about him anymore. The IT was about standing up to bullies, about protecting his freedom, about honoring Eleanor's memory by refusing to be cowed by conformity. As he walked back to his house, he noticed a slight shift in the air, a subtle change in the light, that he looked up and saw Carol Vandergelt standing on her immaculately manicured lawn, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable behind her designer sunglasses. She didn't say a word, but her gaze lingered on Arthur's desert garden, a silent declaration of war. Arthur met her stare, a defiant glint in his own eyes. The game was on, and Arthur Penhaligon was ready to play as he picked up his pace, a plan forming in his mind. As he headed for his garage, he had some rainwater harvesting research to do. Dismissed and mocked. The Harmony Glades Community Clubhouse hung heavy with the scent of lemon cleaner and suppressed animosity. Arthur, clutching his lovingly crafted analyses of rainfall patterns and native flora's thirst, felt a queasy lurch in his gut. Public speaking had always been his bane, even more so now than defending his doctoral work. His committee, at least, hadn't oozed such palpable disdain that he slipped into a back row seat. The plastic groaned under his weight. The room was sparsely filled, mostly with the predictable HOA faces, Gladys from number 14, permanently bronzed, and Mr. Henderson from across the way, perennially glowering. Yet enthroned at the head, behind an imposing expanse of mahogany, sat the ruling cabal: Carol Vandergelt, Mildred Abernathy, and some vaguely familiar bald fellow Arthur Pegg from a long ago. Ill-fated barbecue. Carol's voice, amplified by the sound system, sliced through the quiet. "Good evening. Let's proceed. First, we have Mr. Penhaligon's alleged overconsumption of water." Each word dripped with prosecutorial precision. Arthur rose, knuckles blanching around his charts. "Thank you, Ms. Vandergelt. I'm here to refute the claim and to demonstrate that my water usage is not, in truth, excessive, that in fact, it embodies responsible landscaping, particularly considering our region's aridity." He unfurled his first chart, a vibrant illustration tracking Harmony Glades rainfall over the last decade. As you can see, it's in decline. Conventional lawns simply cannot endure MY landscaping. On the other hand, employs indigenous, drought-resistant plants with drastically reduced needs. Carol interjected, her tone a sickly sweet varnish over steel. "Mr. Penhaligon, we appreciate your passion, but the HOA has clearly defined conservation mandates. Your property, frankly, departs quite noticeably from the established norm." "Norm?" Arthur countered, his brow arching. "You mean the norm of obsessively manicured, resource-devouring lawns sucking our aquifer dry?" Mildred Abernathy leaned forward, her eyes gleaming like sharpened flint. "The mandates, Mr. Penhaligon, are based on sound precepts of resource stewardship and community cohesion. Furthermore, Article 7, Section 3, Paragraph B of the HOA Charter unequivocally stipulates that all landscaping must conform to the pre-approved plant list, ensuring uniformity and upholding property values." Her smile hinted at a deep pleasure in reciting regulatory code. "But those plants aren't native," Arthur blurted, a heat rising in his cheeks. "They demand constant irrigation and upkeep. MY landscaping is designed to flourish here, with minimal intervention." He indicated his second chart, detailing the water needs of various species. "See the data. My succulents and cacti require mere droplets compared to the deluge demanded by the Bermuda grass everyone treasures." Carol sighed, a carefully crafted performance of exasperation. "Mr. Penhaligon, we recognize you hold divergent opinions about gardening. However, the HOA is tasked with preserving the overall appearance and worth of our community. Your unique garden simply doesn't align." "Unique," Arthur echoed, his voice gaining volume. "It's ecologically sound. It's sustainable. It's a thing of beauty." He halted, Realizing he was unraveling, a suppressed giggle rippled through the gathering. Gladys whispered something to Mr. Henderson, who rumbled with laughter. Arthur's face flamed. "Mr. Penhaligon," Carol stated, her voice hardening, "we appreciate you addressing the board. However, we remain firm in our assessment. Your water consumption is excessive, and your landscaping violates HOA rules. You have 30 days to remedy the issue." "Remedy?" Arthur demanded, incredulous. "You want me to rip out my garden and replace it with what? More thirsty grass? More frivolous decorations?" Mildred cut in, her tone gravelly. "Mr. Penhaligon, we are not advocating a complete overhaul. Simple adherence to the approved list is sufficient. Some strategically positioned petunias, perhaps with judicious trimming, should suffice." Arthur stared, dumbfounded. Petunias? He'd rather coat the entire plot with tarmac. "Anything further, Mr. Penhaligon?" Carol asked, her tone a dismissal. Arthur scanned the room, seeking a spark of understanding. He found only self-satisfied grins and veiled mockery. Save for, in the rear, George Harding, the barbecue acquaintance, offered a brief, almost invisible nod at a small token, but it offered a flicker of hope. "No," Arthur croaked. "I suppose not." He gathered his charts, hands trembling faintly, and turned to leave a essay near the exit. He overheard Carol announce, "Next, Mr. Henderson's inappropriately hued lawn ornaments." The door clicked shut, leaving Arthur in the bare hallway. His meticulously researched arguments rendered worthless, a wave of fury washed over him, hotter and sharper than anything since Martha's passing. This wasn't about water or plants. That IT was about dominance. That IT was about conformity. That IT was about Carol Vandergelt's insatiable thirst for power. He walked out into the lot. The desert sun, a brutal slap against his skin. He knew he couldn't yield. That wouldn't. He owed it to Martha, to the land, to himself. Driving home, he replayed George Harding's acknowledgement in his mind, a single sign of solidarity amid a sea of apathy. That IT wasn't much, but it was enough to know he wasn't fighting alone. The empty pool. The familiar dance of sunlight on his bedroom ceiling, usually a vibrant, liquid show projected by the pool, was absent. Instead, a pallid light seeped through the blinds that Arthur's brow furrowed. A disquieting premonition coiled in his gut. He levered himself out of bed, his aging joints protesting. A dull ache that underscored the sharper stab of apprehension. He shuffled to the window, yanked the cord. The blinds clattered open, revealing nothing. To vast, tiled void mocked him where his pool should have sparkled. The cerulean water, the soft susurrus against the coping, the beckoning gleam, all vanished. Only sun-baked concrete glared back, bone-dry and unforgiving. Arthur gaped, his mouth parched. IT resembled an abandoned skate park, a far cry from the tranquil retreat Eleanor had cherished. He bolted outside, the patio's coarse surface a jarring rasp against his bare feet, but he circled the emptiness, half expecting a fissure, a telltale drip, some plausible explanation. But there was none. Drain cover remained firmly sealed. Hoses snaked off into the darkness. The water had simply absented itself, as if swallowed whole in a fit of pique. His gaze snagged on a small, oblong object near the skimmer. At a business card, two words, "Water Hog," were crudely daubed on the back in thick marker. At a frigid spike of outrage eclipsed his initial shock. Arthur snatched the card. Crushing it in his fist, he stormed back inside, his mind a tempest of accusations and conjectures. Carol Vandergelt's self-satisfied smirk, her relentless pronouncements on water austerity, bloomed in his mind's eye. He located his spectacles and scanned his inbox. Among the usual deluge of newsletters and pharmaceutical come-ons, a message from the Harmony Glades HOA caught his attention. The subject line, "Emergency Water Conservation Measures." The email was curt and impersonal, utterly devoid of warmth. That IT announced that, owing to unforeseen conditions and a dire need to curb community water usage, a temporary draining of all private pools was underway. The water would be redirected to crucial community needs. No further justification was offered, no apology extended, no timetable specified for the pool's restoration. the sign off. Harmony Glades, HOA Management. Arthur's indignation surged. This wasn't conservation. It was confiscation and overreach of authority, a blatant act of bullying. He pictured Eleanor, her laughter echoing in the sun-dappled space, the countless hours they had luxuriated in and around that pool. More than mere water, it was a symbol of their shared life, a testament to their joy that he seized his phone and dialed the non-emergency line for the Desert Vista Police Department. He needed to register this grievance, to chronicle it, to retaliate. Desert Vista Police, Officer Ramirez speaking. How may I assist you? The voice conveyed calm professionalism. Officer, my name is Arthur Penhaligon, that I reside in Harmony Glades. Someone has emptied my swimming pool without my consent that I suspect it was the HOA. A brief silence. Emptied your pool, sir? Can you elaborate? Arthur recounted the scenario, his voice taut with barely contained fury. The barren pool, the HOA missive, the business card discovery, he stressed the abruptness, the arbitrary nature of the deed. Officer Ramirez listened with unwavering patience. Mr. Penhaligon, I understand your distress. However, this appears to be a civil matter, not criminal. The HOA likely maintains bylaws governing water consumption and pool upkeep. Should they have breached those bylaws or exceeded their mandate, you will need to pursue legal redress. But they trespassed. They drained my pool. That constitutes trespassing, doesn't it? Property damage? Arthur countered. Trespassing necessitates intent to perpetrate a crime. Mr. Penhaligon, that if the HOA genuinely believe they possess the authority to drain your pool, regardless of whether they are mistaken, it remains a civil dispute. Regarding property damage, water is not legally defined as property, but rather as a resource, its allocation dictated by local statutes and HOA stipulations. Arthur's hope withered, akin to a deflating balloon. So, you're stating there's nothing you can do? I can file a report documenting the event, Mr. Penhaligon. This will establish a record of your complaint. However, I am unable to launch a criminal probe based on the details you've provided. I advise consulting with legal counsel to explore your options. Arthur sighed, the weight of helplessness bearing down. Thank you, Officer Ramirez. You're welcome, Mr. Penhaligon. I appreciate this is disheartening, but please refrain from taking matters into your own hands. Retaliation could result in further legal entanglements. Arthur disconnected, the dial tone an ironic counterpoint in the hushed house. Retaliation. The word hung in the air, both alluring and hazardous. He knew Officer Ramirez spoke truth. He couldn't risk escalating the situation, but the injustice seared within him, a simmering resentment. He gazed at the vacant pool once more, the bleached concrete reflecting the relentless sun. Eleanor surfaced in his thoughts, her skin kissed by the sun, her carefree laughter, the way she would float supine. Contemplating the clouds, he couldn't allow this to stand. He wouldn't permit Carol Vandergelt and her coterie to obliterate Eleanor's memory, to purloin her joy that he ambled to his study. The room redolent of aged tomes and desiccated blooms. He retrieved a time-worn copy of Desert Gardening, a comprehensive manual. He perused the pages, his fingers tracing illustrations of cacti and succulents, drought-resistant shrubs, and vibrant wildflowers. An idea took root, a scheme to transmute the desolate expanse into a declaration of resilience, a bold act of beauty defying tyranny. He would transform his backyard into a desert idol, a vital, breathing tribute to Eleanor's spirit. He booted up his laptop and commenced research into drought-tolerant flora indigenous to the Mojave Desert. He investigated water, harvesting techniques, gray water recycling systems, and sustainable landscaping models. He would immerse himself in knowledge and retaliate, not through rage or aggression, but with understanding and ingenuity. The drained pool would not symbolize defeat. IT would be a pristine canvas, a space for him to conjure something novel, something exquisite, something that would honor Eleanor's memory and challenge the stifling conformity of Harmony Glades. He would demonstrate true conservation's essence, that he would reveal the desert's inherent beauty. He would exhibit the power of resistance, concrete despair. The tremor began as a low thrum, a guttural rumble that resonated in Arthur's very marrow, shattering the morning's quiet. He sipped lukewarm coffee, idly sketching desert flora on a paper napkin, picturing rustling foliage. A balm for the lingering ache in his heart, he dismissed the noise as street repairs, another intrusive step in Harmony Glade's relentless quest for manufactured perfection. Then he registered the reality that a colossal cement mixer, its drum rotating with a sluggish, nauseating cadence, loomed at the edge of his property, a thick, gray pipeline, like a monstrous intestine, extended from the truck's rear, its opening aimed directly at the raw cavity where his pool had stood. Arthur faltered, nearly spilling his drink, that he rushed toward the vehicle, his pulse a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. "Hold it, what's going on?" The driver, a stout man with skin like tanned leather, barely spared him a glance. "Got an order to fill her in. Permanent solution," they said. He gestured with a greasy thumb. "HOA deal. A permanent solution." Arthur's voice wavered. Disbelief and rage churned within him. "That's my pool. You can't just bury it under concrete." The driver merely shrugged, absorbed in adjusting the nozzle. "Lady said it's a hazard. Waste of resources. This is the fix." He tugged at his cap, impervious to the gathering tempest in Arthur's eyes. "Just doing what I'm paid to do, old-timer." Arthur stood frozen as the first glutinous surge of concrete oozed from the pipe, spattering against the fragmented tiles. The liquid stone enveloped Eleanor's mosaic of playful dolphins, a design she'd selected with such joy that a tidal wave of grief threatened to drown him. This wasn't solely about the pool. It was the obliteration of Eleanor's memory, the silencing of echoes of laughter, the burial of their shared life beneath a suffocating, cold gray. He bolted, his aging legs propelled by desperate urgency towards the pristine lawns of the HOA headquarters. Forgetting the manicured beds of petunias, he burst through the glass doors into the air-conditioned chill of the reception area. Carol Vandergelt, enthroned behind her imposing desk, registered an expression of carefully feigned surprise. "Arthur, what an unexpected pleasure." "Pleasure?" Arthur spat, his voice hoarse with fury. "There's a cement truck pouring concrete into my pool. By whose authority?" Carol smoothed her impeccable hairstyle, her face tightening. "The boards, naturally we discussed this. Permanent water conservation, not a vital measure." "Vital?" Arthur slammed his fist on the mahogany surface, startling her. "That pool held memories. Carol, it was intrinsic to my life. You can't simply erase it because you deem it wasteful." "Wasteful it certainly was," Carol countered, her tone laced with disdain. Vandergelt Estates would become a defiant, flourishing desert, a living monument to nature's resilience and his unwavering resolve. Initially, the notion seemed preposterous, a broken man's fever dream. Yet as he immersed himself in research, poring over maps, soil assays, and climatic records, the absurdity crystallized into a chillingly logical strategy. This wasn't about scattered cacti and succulents. He intended to engineer an entire ecosystem, a self-sustaining web of life perfectly, calibrated to the parched conditions he would orchestrate. He began with the earth. Carol and her cohorts believed they were clever, filling his pool with concrete. They believed they were obliterating history. They were wrong. All they did was lay the foundation. Arthur would pulverize that concrete, blending it with native soil, sharp sand, and a carefully curated cocktail of organic material. He'd forge a substrate both porous and rich, ideal for the xeric paradise he envisioned. Next, the water, or, more precisely, the strategic absence of it. Arthur would institute a sophisticated rainwater harvesting scheme, channeling runoff from roofs and driveways into buried reservoirs. He'd embrace gray water recycling, purifying wastewater from showers and sinks to nourish thirstier plants. He would educate his neighbors, assuming he could win them over, in the art of water conservation, not through punitive measures and the eradication of cherished green spaces, but through intelligent design and responsible stewardship. The plants were his army. He devoted countless hours to studying indigenous desert species, Selecting varieties that were not merely drought-resistant, but visually arresting, he imagined a tapestry of vibrant hues and textures. The incandescent blossoms of desert marigolds, the majestic silhouettes of saguaros, the delicate filigree of brittlebush. He sought to create a place of beauty and marvel, a sanctuary that inspired reverence for the natural world. That he pushed himself up from his chair, the weight of his bereavement momentarily eased by the sheer scope of the undertaking. He needed supplies. He needed to begin now. The following weeks dissolved into a frenetic haze. Arthur became an elusive figure, a fleeting presence in local nurseries and hardware emporiums. He haunted online seed merchants, procuring rare and exotic desert cultivars from around the globe. He amassed an arsenal of tools: spades, rakes, wheelbarrows, jackhammers. His garage, once a showcase for Eleanor's meticulously cataloged gardening tools, now resembled a construction staging area. He forged a connection with Martha, the matriarch of a small, independent nursery on the town's periphery, a crone with an encyclopedic comprehension of desert flora. She discerned the burning intensity in his gaze, the steel in his resolve, and knew he was more than just an eccentric old man tinkering in his backyard. She saw a warrior, fighting for a cause greater than himself. She became his confidant, his advisor, and his purveyor of the most unusual and elusive specimens. He reclaimed cast-off materials from construction sites and demolition zones, salvaging discarded bricks, stones, and conduits. He even persuaded a local sculptor to donate a collection of scrap metal artwork, which he intended to interweave into the landscape as whimsical points of interest. He labored with unflagging energy, propelled by a force that was both exhilarating and terrifying. That he slept sporadically, ate haphazardly, and barely interacted with the world beyond his property line. His mind a vortex of planning. One twilight, as the sun painted the sky in fiery streaks of amethyst and gold, Arthur stood at the precipice of the concrete expanse that had entombed his pool. The petrified surface reflected the dwindling light, a cold, unyielding mirror of his sorrow. He fixed his gaze upon it, his jaw tight, his expression resolute. He saw not a symbol of surrender, but a canvas of possibility to a foundation for rebirth. That he raised a fist, clenched tight, and shook it at the heavens. "You want a desert, Carol?" he rasped, his voice raspy with fatigue and fury. "I'll give you a desert that will haunt your dreams." He retreated to his study, his steps measured but determined. He opened a well-worn, leather-bound journal and began to transcribe his vision. That he detailed his strategy with meticulous precision, sketching layouts, cataloging plant species, calculating hydrological demands. He filled page after page with his vision, his rancor, his anguish. He wrote of Eleanor, her zest for living, her ardor for the natural world, her unwavering conviction in the promise of renewal. He wrote of Carol Vandergelt, her conceit, her charade, her unquenchable thirst for authority. He wrote of the desert, its stark beauty, its unbreakable spirit, its arcane wisdom. He wrote of his plan to transform Vandergelt Estates into a vibrant, thriving ode to nature's power, a defiant act of rebellion against the monotony of conformity. He closed the journal, his hand trembling slightly. He felt a rush of vigor, a reawakened sense of mission. He was no longer drowning in the abyss of despair. He was fighting for a future. He was planting the seeds of retribution, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that they would blossom, transforming grief into a landscape of resistance. The following dawn, Arthur slipped on his oldest gardening gloves, seized a sledgehammer, and marched out to the concrete slab. He lifted the hammer high overhead and brought it crashing down on the implacable surface. The reverberating sound echoed through the neighborhood, a declaration of independence. He would not be suppressed. He would not be undone. He would cultivate his desert, one shattering blow at a time. Ecological warfare. Arthur's garage, once a haven for trowels and Eleanor's catalog seeds, had morphed into a makeshift laboratory. The workbench, cleared and draped with salvage pool liner, held a recently delivered microscope beneath a glaring halogen lamp. Its polished surface reflected the feverish intensity in his gaze. Samples pilfered from across Harmony Glades, the manicured carpets bordering the Vandergeld estate, the weedy patch behind the community center, even a stolen pinch from Carol's prized roses, stood in meticulously labeled jars that he prodded a sample, the dark loam clinging stubbornly to his tool. The heavy, earthy smell, once a comfort, now fueled his mounting ire. He had to dissect his adversary, uncover its vulnerabilities. Harmony Glades was built upon a foundation of falsehoods. The illusion of perfect lawns, the deceit of effortless beauty, the sham of community, and beneath it all, a fundamental lie about the natural world that he would unearth it, stratum by stratum, particle by particle. The hours dissolved in a flurry of investigation that he scoured online resources, cross-referencing soil compositions with indigenous plant life, average precipitation, and geological surveys. The analysis revealed soil that, while appearing fertile, was surprisingly thin, resting atop a layer of compacted clay that stifled drainage. The water table, though present, was sustained artificially by relentless irrigation systems greedily sucking the aquifer dry. The entire ecosystem was a fragile, precarious construction, poised for collapse that a bleak satisfaction swelled within him. Carol and her cohorts thought destroying his pool was saving water. He'd enlighten them on true water conservation. He would demonstrate the power of nature. Left unbridled, to flourish, he would usher in a new regime, a novel resilience, a previously unseen beauty, one that thrived on hardship, not contrivance. His eyes fell on the rows of seedlings sprouting in peat pots, not the frail, thirsty petunias and impatiens that dominated Harmony Glades, but robust desert natives, prickly pear cacti, agaves, yuccas, and resilient shrubs like creosote and brittlebush. Martha at the nursery had been invaluable, assisting not only in procuring the plants, but offering crucial guidance on acclimation and soil conditioning. She understood his ambition. The silent revolt he was orchestrating this night enveloped Harmony Glades. Arthur armed himself for his inaugural clandestine mission. Clad in dark apparel, a hooded sweatshirt concealing his features, he loaded a modified garden cart with his precious burden, moving soundlessly. The air was cool and moist, the aroma of freshly watered lawns nauseatingly sweet. He began with the communal area behind the community center, a forsaken patch of turf occasionally frequented by listless teenagers. He excavated small holes with a hand trowel, carefully enriching the soil with sand and gravel to aid drainage. He embedded the agave and yucca, their sharp edges, gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Though small and fragile now, he knew they would prosper, sending roots deep into the earth, deriving nourishment from the parched ground. Next, Carol's rose bushes became his target. He felt a wave of vindictive delight as he carefully nestled a prickly pear cactus mere inches from her cherished Queen Elizabeth roses that he envisioned her shriek upon discovering the unwelcome interloper. Its spines a mute condemnation of her artificial perfection that he labored. Swiftly, efficiently, a shadow darting through the dark, he conscientiously avoided security cameras. Hugging the shadows and utilizing thick foliage for cover, he knew the risks, but the memory of Eleanor, of her affection for the wild, drove his resolve. Returning home, exhaustion gnawed at him, yet he felt curiously invigorated. He shed his soiled attire and stretched out on the bed, listening to the chorus of crickets in the gloom. He closed his eyes, picturing the desert flora taking hold, gradually transforming Harmony Glades into a testament to resilience and defiance. The following day, Arthur commenced a meticulous survey of the existing plant life that he roamed the streets of Harmony Glades, notepad in hand, cataloging species, recording their condition, and pinpointing their weaknesses. The lawns were a monoculture of Kentucky bluegrass, a parched, needy species that demanded constant irrigation and fertilization. The flower beds overflowed with annuals, their vivid hues concealing their dependence on artificial sustenance. Even the established trees, predominantly non-native varieties like weeping willows and Bradford pears, displayed indications of distress. their leaves flagging in the summer heat. He focused intently on the irrigation system, tracing the web of pipes and sprinkler heads, evaluating their placement and functionality. That it became clear that the system was engineered for uniformity, dispensing an equal measure of water to every plant, regardless of its requirements. This was a formula for failure, favoring the water guzzlers and ignoring the drought-tolerant species. He spent hours scrutinizing runoff patterns after the sprinkler ceased operation, noting areas where water pooled and areas that remained arid. He surmised that the soil was compacted in many locations, impeding water penetration. The water simply cascaded away, carrying fertilizers and pesticides into the storm drains, contaminating the nearby waterways. That he recognized an opening that he could exploit the failings of the established ecosystem, subtly influencing the environment to benefit his desert flora. He could tamper with the irrigation system, diverting water to areas in dire need. He could introduce beneficial microbes and fungi to enhance soil health and moisture retention. He could even employ the existing plants as a type of nurse crop, providing shade and protection for the young desert natives. His plan crystallized, evolving from a crude act of rebellion into a refined ecological strategy. He wasn't merely planting desert flora. He was engineering an ecosystem, crafting a self-sustaining landscape capable of thriving in the arid climate. He knew that Carol and the HOA would oppose him at every turn. They would endeavor to eradicate his plants, to undermine his efforts. But he was prepared. He would remain vigilant, adjusting his tactics as necessary. That he possessed the knowledge, the resources, and the steadfast determination to prevail. He was fighting for more than simply his garden. He was fighting for the very essence of Harmony Glades, for the privilege of coexisting with nature. Not in contradiction to it, as twilight descended, painting the heavens in shades of copper and amethyst, Arthur retreated to his makeshift lab. He poured himself a glass of water, the cool liquid a welcome contrast to the day's oppressive heat. He surveyed the microscope, the jars of soil, the rows of seedlings. He was no longer just a grieving widower. He was an ecological warrior, a guardian of the desert, a champion of nature. And he was ready for battle. The thirst begins. Carol Vandergelt marched through her rose garden, the cool morning offering scant relief from her burgeoning ire. Usually, the sight of her crimson glory specimens, lush blossoms juxtaposed against emerald foliage, evoked pride. Not today. The radiant heads hung listlessly, like flags at half-mast. Their once upright stalks leaned precariously, and the verdant leaves bore an ominous yellow tinge that a pulse hammered behind her eye. "What in the devil?" she hissed, her voice strained with disbelief. She brushed a petal, and it disintegrated into dust against her gardening glove. The soil, typically moist and fertile thanks to her rigorous regimen, felt oddly parched and coarse. She straightened, suspicion solidifying her features. Arthur Penelagon it was invariably him. Ever since the kerfuffle by the pool, the man had been a persistent irritant on the otherwise placid surface of Harmony Glades. He was probably poisoning her blooms, sabotaging her hard work, purely because she'd dared to uphold the community standards. She strode across the manicured lawn, her heels clicking sharply on the stone path, each footfall fueled by outrage. She spotted Arthur in his front yard, attending to his eyesore. It was scarcely a garden anymore. Gaunt, thorny plants clawed upward from the rocky soil, and sun-baked animal skeletons functioned as grim ornamentation. "Penhaligon," she snapped, her voice wavering slightly. Arthur pivoted, his expression hidden behind dark lenses that a ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Carol, what brings you to my humble abode?" "Spare me the pleasantries," she retorted, planting her hands on her hips. "My roses are failing, and I know full well you're responsible." Arthur arched a brow, feigning innocence. "Failing? How unfortunate. Perhaps a touch more hydration is in order." "Don't insult my intelligence. I'll water them religiously." "This is your doing, isn't it? Some sort of toxic concoction?" "Toxic concoction?" Arthur chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Carol, you wound me that I'm simply adopting a more eco-conscious approach to landscaping. Perhaps your roses are simply parched. Parched, she scoffed. They're drowning in municipal water. This is deliberate sabotage. You're trying to discredit me, aren't you? To undermine my authority. My dear Carol, Arthur purred, his tone dripping with mock solicitude. I wouldn't dream of it. You managed to undermine yourself quite admirably. He returned to his gardening, dismissing her outright. Carol sputtered, momentarily robbed of speech. I'll report you to the HOA. I'll have you penalized. You'll what, Carol? Arthur inquired without turning. Cut off my water again. You've already accomplished that. There's nothing left for you to confiscate. Carol, her face burning crimson, spun on her heel and stormed back towards her residence. Muttering threats under her breath, she'd show them all. Harmony Glades wouldn't devolve into some arid wasteland. Not on her watch. Later that afternoon, Mildred Abernathy, the HOA's self-anointed guardian of aesthetic purity, lumbered towards Arthur's front door, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. Her lipstick was garishly bright, a jarring contrast to the permanent scowl creasing her face. Mr. Penhaligon, she announced, her voice coated with saccharine disapproval. I'm here to inform you that you are in contravention of multiple HOA covenants. Arthur leaned against the door jamb, arms crossed. Let me venture a guess that MY foliage is non-compliant. Your entire front yard is a disgrace to this community, Mildred proclaimed, her gaze sweeping over the stark landscape with undisguised contempt. Gravel is not an approved ground cover. The plantings are not on the approved species list, and those bones are utterly unacceptable. They lend character, Arthur offered mildly. Mildred sputtered. Character? This is Harmony Glades, Mr. Penhaligon, not some charnel house. She scribbled furiously on her clipboard. You are hereby assessed $500 per infraction. That's $1,500 in total. Failure to remedy these violations within 48 hours will result in further sanctions. Arthur remained impassive. And what sanctions might those be, Mildred? Will you pave my entire property with concrete? It wouldn't surprise me. Mildred's eyes narrowed to slits. We have other recourses, Mr. Penhaligon. Don't presume you can flout the rules with impunity. This community adheres to standards, and we are determined to enforce them. She shoved a notice into his hand and waddled away. Leaving Arthur contemplating the flimsy document, he crushed it in his fist. The HOA might think they were prevailing, but they were merely hastening the inevitable. The desert was coming, whether they acknowledged it or not. That evening, George Harding, a typically reticent man and a reluctant member of the HOA board, stood in his own yard, a troubled expression furrowing his brow. His immaculate lawn, formerly a source of pride, now displayed alarming symptoms of decline. Patches of brown, brittle and lifeless, were spreading like a contagion. He'd watered assiduously, adhering to the HOA's rigid parameters, but to no avail. He glanced across the street at Arthur's yard. The spiky plants appeared to flourish in the arid conditions. He couldn't suppress a grudging admiration for Arthur's defiance, for his courage to challenge the HOA's stifling grip. But he recalled the day they emptied Arthur's pool, the dispassionate efficiency with which the HOA had eradicated something beautiful and personal. He'd felt a twinge of guilt then, a feeling that they were overstepping their bounds. But he'd remained silent, fearing repercussions. Now, as he watched his own turf wither and decline, he wondered if Arthur held the truth. Perhaps their endeavors to tame nature were ultimately futile. Perhaps they were fighting a war they couldn't win. He noticed Arthur emerge from his dwelling and amble towards his garden. George hesitated, then took a hesitant step forward. Arthur, he called out quietly. Arthur halted and turned, his expression wary. George, can I assist you with something? George shuffled his feet, avoiding Arthur's gaze. My lawn, it's not thriving. Arthur nodded slowly. I've observed. I've been watering it, as we're required to. George mumbled, his voice barely audible. But it's only deteriorating. Arthur paused, then said, the desert always triumphs. George thought, in the end, it always triumphs. George looked at Arthur, a spark of understanding igniting in his eyes. "What do you signify?" Arthur refrained from a direct answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and extracted a small envelope of seeds that he offered it to George. "These are desert marigolds," he explained. "They're drought-tolerant, striking, and they attract pollinators. Scatter them along the border of your lawn. See what transpires." George hesitated, then accepted the packet. I don't know, Arthur. The HOA. The HOA can't dictate everything, George," Arthur said, his voice resolute. "Sometimes you simply need to sow a seed and observe what takes root." George examined the packet in his hand, then back at Arthur. A faint smile played on his lips. "Perhaps you're correct," he said. He slipped the seeds into his pocket and turned to leave. "Thank you, Arthur." Arthur watched him depart, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. The thirst had taken hold. And with thirst came the first fractures in Harmony Glade's artificial facade, secrets and scandals. A shiver traced Arthur's spine as he worked, the afternoon sun blocked by drawn blinds, creating a cool, almost sepulchral atmosphere in his study. The stillness, however, sharpened his focus. Vindictiveness wasn't in his nature, but Carol Vandergelt had left him no other choice. Reason, gentle resistance, even ignoring her provocations had failed. Now, a more calculated approach was needed that he proofread the email, ensuring it was concise, factual, and potentially ruinous. Every precaution had been taken to conceal his involvement. The disposable email address, routed through a maze of international servers, made tracing its origin virtually impossible before its arrival in Evelyn Chen's inbox. The subject line was stark: Harmony Glades HOA, fiscal discrepancies. The message outlined Carol's dubious expense reports over the previous 5 years, detailing padded invoices from defunct landscaping firms, suspiciously large consulting payments to a company registered to her sister, and a significant sum allocated to community beautification that had seemingly evaporated. Attached were scanned documents painstakingly unearthed from the HOA's publicly accessible records, archives Carol clearly assumed were ignored. After a moment's pause, he clicked send. He slumped back, overcome by a wave of fatigue. The rose dust incident had stolen his sleep, replaying Carol's incandescent rage and George Harding's tentative acceptance of the desert flower seeds, that he could only hope this was the right course of action, that Evelyn Shun would pursue the lead, and above all, that it would shatter Carol's shield of invincibility. Evelyn Shun battled a looming deadline on a city council budget story when the anonymous email landed. Usually, she trashed such missives, often inaccurate or simply vindictive. But the subject line snagged her attention. Harmony Glades HOA, she'd heard whispers, tales of petty autocracy and obsessive lawn maintenance, and fiscal discrepancies were always intriguing. She nearly deleted it. She was swamped. Yet, the language, precise and devoid of hyperbole, gave her pause. This wasn't the rant of a disgruntled homeowner, but something measured, considered. Sighing, she opened the attachment. Her eyes widened as she examined the documents. The invoices seemed off. The consulting fees were outrageous, and the community beautification entry fairly reeked of impropriety. For 3 hours, she burrowed into online databases, cross-referencing business registrations, probing property records, and connecting the dots. The deeper she delved, the surer she became that this was more than mere discontent. Something was deeply amiss in Harmony Glades. The consulting firm did indeed belong to Carol Vandergelt's sister, Susan Abernathy. Its listed address a rented mailbox at a commercial pack-and-ship store. The landscaping companies responsible for the inflated bills were defunct, their licenses revoked for fraudulent billing, and the missing community beautification funds. A trail of shell corporations led to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Evelyn leaned back, a slow smile curving her lips. This was bigger than manicured lawns and water regulations. This was about avarice, corruption, and the abuse of authority. This was a story that demanded to be told. The next morning, Evelyn stood on Carol Vandergelt's immaculate porch. The roses, despite all attempts at preservation, appeared distressed. Several bushes had been brutally pruned, leaving raw wounds against the surviving growth, Carol answered, her expression strained. She wore a clashy floral dress, and her makeup was, predictably, flawless. Ms. Vandergelt, Evelyn stated, displaying her press badge. Evelyn Chun, Valley Gazette. I have some questions regarding the Harmony Glades, HOA's finances. Carol's eyes narrowed. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm busy. She started to shut the door. Evelyn stood firm. Ms. Vandergelt, I have copies of expense reports, invoices, and bank statements suggesting financial improprieties within the HOA. Specifically, I'm interested in the consulting fees paid to Susan Abernathy's company, the inflated invoices from Greentham Landscaping, and the missing community beautification funds. Carol froze, color draining from her face, her makeup a fragile veneer over rising panic. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her voice losing its characteristic steel. These are lies. Fabrications. Perhaps you could explain the exorbitant consulting fees? Evelyn pressed, displaying a copy of an invoice. Or why Greentham Landscaping's license was revoked for fraud? Carol's composure shattered. This is outrageous. Who told you? Who gave you these documents? Evelyn smiled, a professional, almost predatory expression. That's irrelevant, Ms. Vandergelt. What matters is that the residents of Harmony Glades have a right to know where their money is going. Carol's eyes darted nervously. This is a conspiracy. Someone is trying to sabotage me, to destroy the HOA. Someone like Arthur Penhaligon, perhaps? Evelyn inquired, watching for her reaction. Carol didn't respond verbally, but her face spoke volumes, a spark of raw hatred ignited in her eyes. Evelyn scribbled a note. Ms. Vandergelt, I intend to publish a story in the Valley Gazette. I'm offering you the opportunity to address these allegations. Carol's voice was a mere thread. I have nothing to say. Evelyn nodded. Very well. Thank you for your time. She turned, leaving Carol a statue of frozen fury amid a garden of failing roses, driving away. Evelyn felt a conflicting mix of satisfaction and apprehension. She had a story, a significant one, but she also knew she'd set loose a tempest. Carol Vandergelt would not concede easily, and Arthur Penhaligon, wherever he was, had just become a target. Back in his study, Arthur felt an odd sense of anticipation that he knew the article would appear soon. He could practically sense the tremors it would cause in Harmony Glades. He glanced at his garden, the native plants thriving under the desert sun. The HOA might try to control the landscape, to impose their outdated ideals. But nature, like truth, always found a way to flourish. The desert takes hold. The desert didn't arrive with a bang, but a slow, creeping advance that it was a silent invasion, disguised as drought and neglect. At first, it was just a browning patch here, a brittle, yellowing blade there. Then, the xeriscape gardens, seeded with resilience, began to flex their muscle. Purple verbena spilled over retaining walls, their tenacious roots anchoring them to the parched earth. Gaillardia, with their sun-baked hues of crimson and gold, pushed aside pampered petunias, the HOA approved. Lawns, once emerald green testaments to conformity, started to resemble sun-faded memories. Arthur watched it all with a quiet satisfaction, a grim kind of joy. He positioned himself on his porch swing, nursing a mug of lukewarm tea, the morning sun warming his face. The time-lapse of the desert's embrace played out before him in agonizingly slow motion that he saw it in the increasing number of lawn service needed, signs sprouting like unwelcome weeds, that he heard it in the muttered complaints as residents struggled with recalcitrant sprinklers, their watering schedules now woefully inadequate. He remembered the initial smugness of some residents, the ones who'd scoffed at his weed patch. Now, they were scrambling for answers, their desperation a stark contrast to Carol Vandergelt's carefully constructed facade of control. Arthur rose from the swing, the metal groaning beneath him. He needed to replenish his supply of compost tea, a concoction he brewed in a large, repurposed trash can hidden behind the garage. It was an act of defiance. A quiet thumbing of the nose at the HOA's chemical-laden lawn treatments. He suspected they were contributing to the problem, weakening the grasses. Natural defenses. As he reached the edge of his property, he noticed Mrs. Henderson next door, struggling with her garden hose. The water sputtered and coughed, more air than moisture. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Arthur said, his voice deliberately neutral. She turned, her face etched with frustration. "Mr. Penhaligon, this infernal water pressure, it's barely a trickle. The roses are practically begging for water." Arthur remembered George Harding and his rose dust. Harding had, surprisingly, accepted a packet of desert flower seeds from Arthur some time ago, but he hadn't seen any sign of them in George's yard. Perhaps the rose bushes were too deeply ingrained in his identity. "It's been happening all over Harmony Glades," Mrs. Henderson continued, wiping her brow with a gloved hand. "I heard they're blaming it on the drought, but it's never been this bad before." Arthur shrugged, feigning ignorance. "Well, these desert plants of mine seem to be thriving. Maybe it's a sign?" Mrs. Henderson gave him a withering look before turning back to her recalcitrant hose. Arthur continued on his way, a faint smile playing on his lips. Later that afternoon, under the guise of checking his own irrigation system, Arthur made his way to the community water main. He knew the location well. He'd studied the HOA schematics years ago, when he and Eleanor were planning their own garden, before Carol and her cronies had taken over. The access panel was hidden behind a clump of ornamental grasses. Arthur knelt, feeling the rough concrete beneath his knees. That he opened the panel, revealing a complex network of pipes and valves. That he pulled out a small multi-tool from his pocket, a tool Eleanor had given him for his birthday. Its worn handle a comforting weight in his hand. He worked quickly and efficiently, his movements precise and deliberate. He didn't disable the entire system. That would be too obvious. Instead, he focused on subtly reducing the water pressure, just enough to exacerbate the existing problems. To push the already struggling lawns over the edge, he adjusted a few valves, loosened a few connections, creating a barely perceptible leak that would worsen over time. That he then planted a small, innocuous-looking device near the main line, a battery-powered solenoid valve he'd salvaged from an old washing machine. He'd programmed it to periodically restrict the flow of water, creating intermittent pressure drops throughout the system. It was a slow, insidious form of sabotage, difficult to detect, and even harder to trace back to him. As he closed the access panel, he heard the distinct sound of high heels clicking on the pavement. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. It was Bev Olson, the HOA's resident gossip monger. She was on her daily walk, her eyes scanning the neighborhood with predatory interest. "Afternoon, Mr. Penhaligon," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Just admiring your unique landscaping." Arthur stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. "Thank you, Mrs. Olson. I find it quite sustainable." Bev Olson chuckled, a brittle, unpleasant sound. "Sustainable, perhaps, but I heard property values are plummeting. People are starting to panic. They say those desert weeds are sucking the life out of everything." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? I haven't noticed." "Oh, you will," she said, her eyes glinting with malice. "Mark my words, Mr. Penhaligon, you will." She paused, her gaze fixed on the closed access panel. "What were you doing down there?" "Just checking the sprinkler system," Arthur replied, his voice calm and steady. "Making sure my desert plants are getting enough, or not enough, as the case may be." Bev Olson scrutinized him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a final, venomous smile, she continued on her way, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm against the pavement. Arthur watched her go, his hand tightening around the multi-tool in his pocket. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he couldn't stop now. He had a score to settle, a promise to keep. He would continue to nurture the desert, to watch it spread, to let it reclaim what was rightfully its. The next few weeks brought a chorus of complaints. The HOA meetings became increasingly acrimonious, filled with accusations and recriminations. Carol Vandergelt, her face a mask of barely suppressed rage, blamed the drought, the water company, even the residents themselves for their negligence. The Browning lawns became a symbol of the community's decline, a visual representation of Carol Vandergelt's crumbling authority. For sale signs sprouted like desert wildflowers, a testament to the growing exodus. Arthur, watching from his porch, felt a cold satisfaction. The desert was taking hold, and with it, the seeds of rebellion that he knew that Carol wouldn't let this go unanswered, that she would retaliate with all her might. But he was ready. He had nothing left to lose, except perhaps the memory of Eleanor. And he would protect that memory with everything he had. Chaos and Harmony Glades. The Harmony Glades community clubhouse smelled faintly of despair, overlaid with the cloying sweetness of decaying roses. Mildred Abernathy, her face a roadmap of disapproval, brandished a clipboard teeming with infraction notices. The air conditioning, usually a bulwark against the Arizona furnace, wheezed pathetically, a fitting echo of the HOA's weakening authority. "Order! I demand order!" Carol Vandergelt slammed a worn gavel, its report lost in the rising tide of grievances. "We shall not degenerate into barbarism. We are, or should be, a sophisticated community." A voice belonging to Mrs. Henderson, whose prize-winning petunias had mysteriously withered, lanced through the din. "Sophisticated? My petunias look like they've been sandblasted. And my water bill. Don't even get me started." George Harding, squirming in his seat, feebly tried to conceal himself behind a drooping bouquet he'd received those native wildflower seeds from Arthur, a gift he'd promptly dismissed, clinging to the familiar, thirsty comfort of English roses in an unforgiving climate. Now, both Roses and George were suffering. Someone, Carol's tone dripped arsenic, is deliberately sabotaging our water system. Outright vandalism. We will unmask them and levy appropriate consequences. Accusations zipped through the air like poisoned arrows. Mrs. Abernathy aimed a skeletal finger at young Timmy Miller, whose skateboarding escapades had long grated on her nerves. Timmy's mother, Brenda, a redhead with a fiery spirit, snapped back that Mrs. Abernathy was clearly out of touch with reality, possibly from overexposure to her arsenal of garden toxins. That Carol's gavel crashed down again, a hairline fracture appearing in the wood. Nothing was unfolding as planned. Harmony Glades was intended to be a shining example of suburban order, a monument to her leadership. Instead, it was collapsing like a poorly iced cake. "Enough," Carol thundered, her voice fraying at the edges. "I will not countenance this internal strife. We require solutions, not recriminations, and I, for one, have conceived a strategy." Silence descended, a shaky armistice born of shared trepidation. "I have engaged the services of Rick Sanchez's landscaping. They specialize in challenging landscapes. They will revive our lawns to their former splendor. And they will, let's just say, manage the unorthodox flora that has been proliferating." Carol shot daggers in Arthur's direction. Avoiding his gaze, he remained tranquil, his desert garden a rebellious emerald in the parched landscape. Later that afternoon, Carol, still simmering, paced her meticulously arranged living room. The spotless white carpet felt like unstable ground underfoot. The telephone clamored. It was Patricia, her neighbor, lamenting the inexplicable browning of her St. Augustine grass. Carol stifled a scream, forcing a syrupy smile. "Oh, Patricia, I am so sorry to hear that. Rest assured, Rick Sanchez's landscaping arrives tomorrow. They'll resolve everything." Replacing the receiver, she caught her reflection in the gleaming silver of the family portrait. The face looking back bore the etchings of worry, her perfectly sculpted hair losing its rigid form. She appeared afraid. The notion was insupportable. Carol Vandergelt didn't experience fear. She exacted retribution. Meanwhile, Arthur Penhaligon, seemingly immune to the turmoil he had triggered, tended his xeric garden. The descending sun painted the cacti and succulents in fiery hues that he stroked the velvety petals of a desert rose, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile gracing his lips. He anticipated Carol's response. He had been preparing for it. Rick Sanchez's landscaping, a known entity. Reputable, yes, but also unforgiving. They would arrive with herbicides, with heavy machinery. with a single-minded focus to exterminate anything deviating from their template of suburban sameness. He felt no concern. He was ready. He had dedicated weeks, months even, to immersing himself in the desert, deciphering its secrets. That he understood the location of the subterranean aquifers, the hidden reservoirs that sustained life, that he knew the species that flourished in the most brutal conditions, the ones immune to any assault Carol and her landscaping brigade could mount. He had also been proliferating covertly. The desert blooms he'd subtly deployed weren't just in George Harding's pathetic rose patch. They were ubiquitous, scattered in the flower beds of the unwitting, established along the peripheries of the common. Areas that a clandestine, almost imperceptible infiltration. Retrieving his notebook, its pages filled with detailed diagrams and annotations, he reread a passage he'd transcribed from a text on arid ecology. The desert presents a visage of desolation, yet beneath the surface lies a vibrant, interdependent web of life, poised for the opportunity to flourish. Closing the notebook, he surveyed his garden, a miniature ecosystem meticulously nurtured. It symbolized more than just cultivation. It represented resistance, a proclamation of nature's resilience, an eloquent rebuke to the HOA's overreach, and it would soon transform into a theater of conflict. The following morning, the growl of earth-moving equipment shattered the quiet of Harmony Glades. Rick Sanchez's landscaping had deployed that a convoy of vehicles, bearing the company insignia, a pristine lawn bisected by an immaculate white fence, descended upon the community. Carol, radiant, greeted Rick Sanchez himself, a man whose jawline appeared hewn from granite, his gaze sharp enough to peel paint. "Mr. Sanchez, welcome to Harmony Glades. That I trust you are prepared to commence operations?" "Ready and eager, Mrs. Vandergelt," Sanchez replied, his voice as coarse as gravel. "We'll restore this place to perfection in short order." The team moved expeditiously. They commenced uprooting the offending desert flora, saturating the area with herbicides. The air became saturated with the pungent odor of chemicals, a jarring contrast to the delicate aroma of the wildflowers Arthur had planted. Mildred Abernathy, clipboard clutched tightly, shadowed the crew, eagerly highlighting every rogue weed and untrimmed blade. She paused at Arthur's residence, her gaze narrowing at the sight of his thriving xeric garden. That abomination must be eradicated," she stated, her voice dripping with malice. Sanchez nodded curtly. "Consider it resolved." However, as the crew drew near Arthur's property, an unexpected event unfolded. The sprinkler system in Mrs. Henderson's yard, instead of emitting a gentle spray, erupted in a gusher of muddy water, drenching the landscape personnel. That a collective moan issued from the onlookers, witnessing their already embattled lawns undergo further inundation. Then, the power failed. The equipment sputtered to a standstill. The air conditioning went silent. That a chorus of outrage erupted. Carol Vandergelt stood, motionless, her countenance a study in shock. This was not the intended outcome. Rick Sanchez's landscaping was contracted to reinstate order, not unleash pandemonium. Arthur Penhaligon, watching from his veranda, permitted himself a slight smile. The desert was retaliating, and it had only begun to fight. The herbicide's kiss. The whir of the sprayers sliced through the still morning air. Rick Sanchez's crew, vivid yellow blurs against the manicured green, moved with a practiced synchronicity that spoke of countless identical lawns. The chemical fog rolled out, destined to eradicate any vegetative rebellion in Harmony Glades. Hidden behind the flamboyant cascade of his bougainvillea, Arthur observed the impending execution of color. He'd dedicated the prior evening to perfecting his homemade brew, a potent concentrate of citrus and vinegar. Its purpose: to selectively target the water-hogging outsiders, the bluegrass, the azaleas, the thirsting exotics bleeding the aquifer dry. He'd never admit gratitude for Rick Sanchez's scorched earth policy, but it did offer effective camouflage. 2 houses down, George Harding pruned his roses with meticulous care, a furrow etched into his brow. The retired accountant, a loyal HOA adherent, nevertheless nursed a secret longing for the arid lands that he'd confessed, amidst the clinking glasses of a past barbecue, to finding solace in the austere beauty of yuccas and tenacious cacti. Arthur wondered if George now questioned his devotion to an unsustainable ideal. By midday, the first signs of vegetal distress appeared. The emerald lawns faded to a jaundiced yellow, then fractured into desolate patches. Petunia blossoms, once radiant, hung limp, their pigments leaching away like forgotten photographs. The air, previously redolent with freshly mown grass, now carried a sharp, chemical sting. Arthur strolled out, feigning interest in his recently planted cacti. He lingered before Mrs. Henderson's prized roses, their leaves shriveling like ancient scrolls. Oblivious, she likely prepared for her afternoon tea, unaware of the horticultural devastation unfolding beyond her window. At a prickle of conscience surfaced. These weren't adversaries, these neighbors. They were, mostly, just striving for a normal life, seeking order and beauty in a world frequently devoid of both. However, their curated paradise demanded a price Arthur refused to continue paying. The following day, Harmony Glades resembled a war zone. Former lawns lay as brittle, crackling wastelands under the sun. The reek of decay hung heavy. Shades of brown and beige dominated the vista, a monochrome tableau of demise. Arthur stood on his porch, surveying the aftermath. His xeric garden, untouched, thrived amidst the desolation, a vibrant emblem of nature's endurance. The wave of satisfaction washed over him, feeling close to vindication. He'd struck a blow against the HOA's overreach, their wasteful habits, their stifling insistence on uniformity. Yet the triumph was stained with a bitter sadness. He noticed the vacant stares of his neighbors, the confused irritation in their expressions. He registered their muted protests, their seething accusations. He knew he bore responsibility for their predicament, at least in part. The escalating water shortage amplified the crisis. The HOA, scrambling to preserve dwindling reserves, implemented stringent restrictions. Sprinklers became relics, car washes turned into forbidden luxuries, and showers shrank to 5-minute sprints. The grumbling began softly, a low undercurrent of discontent. But as the brown blotches expanded across lawns, the murmurs swelled into full-throated complaints. Groups huddled on corners, voices hushed but laced with simmering rage. "I simply cannot fathom this," Mrs. Davison lamented to a knot of neighbors, her voice trembling with outrage. "My hydrangeas are dying. I've cherished them for 20 years. And the water pressure is abysmal," Mr. Peterson added, adjusting his hearing aid. "Barely enough for a decent rinse." The blame game ignited swiftly, residents accusing each other. Some denounced the HOA for poor management. Others condemned Rick Sanchez's team for faulty herbicides. And still others cast suspicious glances at Arthur Penhaligon and his peculiar desert landscape. George Harding found Arthur as he was tending his desert sage. "Arthur," he began tentatively, "what's happening? My roses, they're all but gone." Arthur met his gaze, his expression inscrutable. "The desert reclaims what was always hers, George," he answered quietly. "It always does." George sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "But the water, we can't even sustain what's left the HOA." He faltered, unable to vocalize the full extent of the HOA's draconian rules. "The HOA is fundamentally flawed, George. They're desperately clutching to a failed model that is detrimental to the environment." Arthur pruned a withered sprig from a sage. "Perhaps, possibly, this is a dire ultimatum." George scanned the ruined terrain, the parched lawns and drooping blossoms. "An ultimatum that's obliterating everything," he whispered. That evening, the community center hosted an emergency assembly. The room overflowed, thick with animosity and anxiety. Carol Vandergelt, her face ruddy with frustration, stood at the podium, struggling to restore order. "We must exercise restraint," she pleaded, her voice strained to the breaking point. "We must collaborate in an effort to come to a resolution." Her statement was consumed by a tumult of complaints and accusations. The residents of Harmony Glades were tearing at each other, their once harmonious community tilting toward complete disintegration. Amidst the escalating pandemonium, Arthur stood wordlessly near the back. Observing the scene, he experienced a contradictory blend of feelings: fulfillment, remorse, and an increasing premonition of disaster. He had ignited an inferno, but he questioned his ability to tame it. The herbicide's kiss had not only ravaged the landscape, but had also permeated the very spirit of Harmony Glades. And he sensed, with mounting apprehension, that the worst was yet to come. The desert had initiated its reclamation, but at what ultimate price? Revelation and reckoning. Desert stars, diamond-hard and aloof, echoed the anticipatory shivers dancing on Arthur's skin. He dipped the bill of the borrowed cap, a shield against prying eyes and recognition. The shapeless jacket, a cast-off from a second-hand store, consumed him, blurring his usual outline. He was simply another malcontent tonight, a specter emerging from the brewing storm. The Harmony Glades Community Hall vibrated with simmering unrest. The atmosphere thrummed with accusation and unease, a stark contrast to the meticulously curated serenity Carol Vandergelt usually enforced. George Harding, his face a parchment map etched with worry lines, cradled a fading rose, its once vibrant petals now brittle and brown, that he murmured to anyone within earshot about the injustice. The sheer, callous disregard for beauty as his prized blooms withered and died, perched on the dais like royalty on a wobbly throne. Carol punctuated the mounting discord with sharp raps of her gavel. The sound, thin and reedy, was quickly swallowed by the rising swell of protest. Her typically immaculate coiffure appeared slightly disheveled, and a web of worry lines fanned out from her usually steely gaze. The water crisis had visibly aged her, revealing the toll of maintaining her rigid control over Harmony Glades. "Order! I insist on order!" she snapped, her voice strained with barely concealed desperation. "We are here to discuss solutions, not wallow in unproductive blame." A chorus of jeers erupted, a tidal wave of collective resentment crashing over Carol. "Solutions? You call penalizing us for watering solutions?" A voice bellowed from the rear. "My lawn is toast, Carol. A crispy wasteland." Arthur melted back against the wall, a silent observer in the gathering storm. Evelyn Shun, a notepad her constant companion, sat near the front, her face a carefully constructed mask of journalistic neutrality. He knew she was on the verge of releasing her exposé, the result of weeks spent untangling the HOA's labyrinthine dealings. He only hoped she was prepared for the fallout. Visibly flustered, Carol struggled to regain command. "We are facing unprecedented drought conditions," she asserted, a tremor betraying her composure. "Conserving water is paramount. The fines are a necessary deterrent to ensure compliance." Compliance? Or subjugation? The query, amplified by a pocket-sized megaphone, sliced through the din. Every head swiveled towards the back. Arthur stepped forward, discarding the trappings of anonymity. The cap came off, revealing his shock of silver hair. The baggy jacket fell away, exposing his familiar professorial tweed. The collective gasp rippled through the room. George Harding's jaw slackened, the dying rose tumbling from his grasp. Evelyn Chen's eyes widened behind her spectacles, her pen suspended in midair. "Officer." Ramirez, stationed calmly near the entrance, straightened, his gaze locking onto Arthur. The Carol's carefully constructed composure dissolved, her face flooded with crimson, her mouth working in silent dismay. "Arthur." "Penhaligon," she managed, her voice barely audible above the buzzing anticipation. Arthur raised the speaker, his gaze sweeping across the sea of stunned faces. "Yes, Carol. Arthur Penhaligon. The man you try to silence, the neighbor you try to crush." The silence was a palpable thing, heavy and thick, that he could feel their shock, their bewilderment, their suppressed anger. But mingled with it was something else, a glimmer of hope, a nascent spark of defiance. "For months, I have witnessed this community suffocated by your dictates, your avarice, and your utter disregard for the sanctity of our natural world. His voice, clear and resonant through the amplifier, echoed through the hall. You champion conservation while diverting our precious water resources for your personal indulgences. You penalize us for nurturing our lawns while you secretly siphon water to the golf course you so frequently patronize. You prioritize manicure perfection over the very lives that call this desert home. He paused, drawing a deep breath. The weight of his actions, the burden of guilt he carried, pressed down on him. My wife, Eleanor, cherished this desert. She saw beauty where others saw desolation. She understood the delicate equilibrium of this fragile ecosystem, the inestimable value of every single drop. His voice cracked, revealing the raw emotion beneath. When she passed, you attempted to erase her memory, to pave over her beloved garden with your artificial ideal. That is when I knew I could no longer remain silent. He gestured towards the parched lawns, the desolate flower beds. Yes, I sabotaged the water supply. I disrupted your precious Harmony Glades, and I stand by my actions. A murmur stirred through the crowd, a complex blend of outrage and hesitant understanding. You may label me a vandal, a transgressor, a lunatic, Arthur continued, his voice swelling with passion. But I am also a neighbor, a friend, and a man who refuses to passively stand by while this community self-destructs in pursuit of a false ideal of uniformity. He fixed his gaze directly on Carol, his eyes burning with righteous indignation. You have erected your empire on a foundation of deception and manipulation. You have suppressed dissent and rewarded blind obedience. But your reign is drawing to a close. Carol, the truth has been unveiled, and the residents of Harmony Glades will no longer be your puppets. The ensuing silence was deafening. Carol returned his gaze, her face a rigid mask of hatred and disbelief. Then, slowly, a solitary hand began to clap. IT belonged to George Harding, still clutching his withered rose. Another hand joined, then another, and another. Soon, the entire hall erupted in applause, a thunderous ovation that threatened to bring down the very walls of Harmony Glades. Evelyn Chin rose to her feet, her notebook clutched tight to her chest. She met Arthur's gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She realized this was more than just a story. It was a watershed moment, a revolution in the making. Carol, her face drained of color, finally found her voice. This is preposterous, she stammered, her voice barely audible above the roaring applause. You can't simply. But the words died in her throat, choked by the tide of rebellion. She surveyed the room, at the faces that once reflected admiration and respect, now alight with anger and open defiance. She saw the writing on the wall, the inevitable demise of her reign. With a sigh of utter defeat, she rose, her shoulders slumping in surrender. I resign, she whispered, her voice barely registering above the din. Effective immediately. The applause intensified, reaching a fever pitch. Carol Vandergelt, the undisputed queen of Harmony Glades, the woman who had ruled with an iron fist, had been overthrown. Officer Ramirez stepped forward, his expression composed and professional. Mr. Penhaligon, he announced, his voice cutting through the noise. I'm going to have to ask you to accompany me. Arthur nodded, his heart heavy but resolute. He understood that his actions would carry consequences. But as he walked past the jubilant throng, he caught a glimpse of renewed hope in their eyes, a hope for a brighter future, a future where community outweighed conformity, where nature was revered, and where the spirit of Eleanor Penhaligon could finally flourish in the desert. He followed the officer out of the hall, leaving behind the remnants of the old Harmony Glades and the seeds of a new beginning. The reckoning had arrived, oasis of change. The patrol car reeked of day-old coffee and muted despair. As Arthur was driven away, George Harding remained on the curb, clutching a single, spent rose, a fragile memento of Eleanor, perhaps a stand-in for Harmony Glades itself, slowly choked by artifice. Evelyn Chun, a blaze of conviction in her gaze, jotted notes with fierce intensity. Arthur understood. His arrest wasn't closure, but a catalyst. The holding cell offered a sterile chill, a far cry from the vibrant life of his xeriscaped haven. Yet, within those grim confines, a surprising serenity bloomed. That he'd spoken, he'd acted, and the oppressive weight of secrecy had finally dissolved. The arraignment was a whirlwind. The charges sabotage, vandalism, conspiracy. A relentless litany. He entered a plea of not guilty. A wave of public support, coupled with a sharp, pro bono attorney, secured his release on bail. Returning home felt dreamlike. Bathed in the honeyed light of dusk, the desert garden pulsed with more beauty than he remembered. Neighbors, previously distant, offered tentative smiles and murmured encouragement. The desert, once a shameful secret, a land Eleanor had cherished, now stood as an emblem of hope rekindled. The seeds he'd sown had indeed sprouted. News of Arthur's stand had ignited a brushfire of attention. National media outlets seized upon Evelyn Chen's expose, portraying Harmony Glades as a microcosm of America's unsustainable obsession with emerald lawns and squandered resources. The Homeowners Association, adrift in the wake of Carol's unceremonious exit, descended into fractious chaos. Arthur, unexpectedly, found himself a reluctant oracle of desert flora. His phone buzzed incessantly. Neighbors, emboldened by his example and thirsty for expertise, sought his counsel. He initiated small, informal gatherings amidst his succulents and cacti, sharing knowledge on native plants, xeriscaping principles, and the imperative of water conservation. Initially, it felt awkward. He was, after all, a confessed transgressor. But as he shared his passion for the arid landscape and his memories of Eleanor, apprehension dissipated like morning mist. He demonstrated how to enrich the soil with compost and gravel, creating optimal drainage for the desert's thirsty children. He elucidated the importance of grouping plants based on their hydration requirements, fashioning miniature ecosystems within the garden's bounds. That he imparted the wisdom of hydrozoning, a technique Eleanor had perfected, ensuring each plant received only the necessary moisture. No more. He illustrated how to sculpt swales and berms to capture precious rainwater, mimicking the desert's natural cycles of abundance and scarcity. Gradually, painstakingly, the manicured expanses of Harmony Glades surrendered. Patches of verdant uniformity yielded to the shimmering allure of silver and sage. Sprinkler systems were retired, replaced by discreet drip lines that snaked beneath the surface. The air, formerly heavy with the manufactured scent of synthetic fertilizers, now carried the delicate perfume of creosote and desert lavender. George Harding, his spent rose now nourishing the soil, proved Arthur's most zealous convert. He eradicated his entire lawn in a single weekend, replacing it with a vibrant mosaic of desert wildflowers. Even Mrs. Henderson, who had once bemoaned Arthur's unsightly weeds, stunned everyone by planting a line of prickly pear cacti along her driveway. The shift transcended mere aesthetics. It was a transformation in mindset, a rejection of the superficiality and conformity that had long defined Harmony Glades. Neighbors began connecting, sharing insights, and exchanging cuttings. They coordinated community workdays, helping each other liberate their yards from sod and cultivate new habitats. One Saturday morning, Arthur glanced out his window to find a small group of neighbors assembled in his front yard. They held shovels and trowels, anticipation lighting their faces. He joined them, and together they commenced planting a new section of his garden, a symphony of diverse colors and textures. As he worked, his hands immersed in the cool earth, Arthur felt a resurgence of connection, a feeling dormant since Eleanor's passing. The garden was no longer simply a memorial. It was a vibrant, breathing embodiment of hope, a testament to the power of community and the indomitable spirit. The HOA, still reeling from the scandal, found itself besieged by growing dissent. Residents clamored for a revision of the landscaping covenants, a move toward more sustainable approaches. Some even proposed dissolving the HOA entirely, replacing it with a more inclusive and ecologically aware community framework. Arthur knew he couldn't claim complete responsibility. He'd merely struck the match. The residents of Harmony Glades, weary of dictates and conformity, had finally discovered their voice. The culmination of this metamorphosis arrived on a balmy evening in late spring. Arthur hosted a community gathering amidst his revitalized desert garden. String lights cast a gentle, ethereal glow over the cacti and succulents. Tables overflowing with food and beverages were spread across the landscape. People arrived from every corner of Harmony Glades, spanning generations and political divides. They laughed. They conversed. They exchanged stories. The atmosphere was relaxed and convivial, a stark contrast to the strained, antagonistic meetings of the past. As twilight deepened, painting long shadows across the desert expanse, Arthur stood on a gentle rise in his garden. Observing the scene, he noticed George Harding engaged in animated conversation with Mrs. Henderson, both gesturing toward a recently planted barrel cactus. He saw children playing among the desert shrubs, their joyous cries echoing. Through the air, he saw Evelyn Chun, ever observant, documenting the moment for posterity. Gratitude swelled within him, a profound sense of fulfillment. He had risked everything, faced arrest and public censure, yet it had all been worthwhile, and he had honored Eleanor's memory, and in doing so, had fostered something genuinely beautiful and significant. Later, as the revelry subsided, Arthur discovered himself alone in the garden. Bathed in pale moonlight, he settled onto a stone bench, gazing at the celestial tapestry above. The air was cool and serene, imbued with the delicate fragrance of night-blooming cereus. He reflected on Eleanor, her profound affection for the desert, her unyielding spirit. He knew she would have been proud of him, proud of his achievements. He had transformed his grief into action, his anger into optimism. Yet, he also recognized that his actions carried consequences, that he still faced weighty charges, and the ensuing legal struggle promised to be lengthy and arduous. That he had disrupted the status quo of Harmony Glades, challenged the HOA's authority, and exposed Carol Vandergelt's malfeasance. Some would never forgive him for that. Nevertheless, as he sat in the tranquil silence of the desert night, Arthur felt a serenity that eclipsed his anxieties. He had acted according to his convictions. He had championed his beliefs. And in doing so, he had attained a measure of healing, a connection to something grander than himself. The desert, once a symbol of loss, had become his refuge. That it was a place for remembering Eleanor, where he could find solace, where he could connect with the earth and the community. That it was an oasis of transformation, a testament to the enduring power of hope and the tenacity of the human spirit. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and allowed the desert air to fill his lungs. That he was prepared for whatever lay ahead. He had discovered his purpose, his tranquility in the heart of the desert. And he knew, with unwavering conviction, that Eleanor would have wanted it this way. The cost of conformity, he now understood, was a far heavier burden than the ramifications of courage. He'd borne it for too long.